told myself when I heard that this book was being released that I should not read it. I read Binding 13 and Keeping 13, and they were two of my favorite reads from last year, but I just knew that this book was not going to work for me. But then it got released and people started hyping it up, going crazy over it, and not only did I solely forget that I told myself I didn't want to read it, but I also forgot why I had told myself that. So obviously I eventually wanted to figure out why everybody was going crazy, so I ordered it for myself, and then I decided to pick it up, and then I remembered why I told myself I didn't want to read it. The thing is that every single month on my Patreon, I am letting my patrons choose one book that I read and review for a YouTube video, and this month this book was chosen, so therefore I kind of felt like a cop-out if I decided to DNF it, because that just doesn't feel too fair. So instead I decided to read the entire thing so that you do not have to, and that is why in today's video I'm first going to give you a summary of what this book is about and how it kind of fits into the timeline of Binding and Keeping 13, and then I'm going to share with you my review for it. I am going to assume that you have already read Binding and Keeping 13 before starting this video. You don't necessarily have to have read those two books to understand what's going on in these books, but since it's the first and second book in the Boys of Toman series, and then Saving 6 and the next book, Redeeming 6, is the third and fourth book, I do highly recommend starting at the beginning, especially because those two books were two of my favorite reads from last year, so obviously I'm going to recommend them. And then just to make it easier on myself and not have to over-explain everything that you should have already had knowledge about because you read Binding and Keeping 13, I'm just going to assume that you have read them and that we're on the same page. And with that said, we can move into what this book is actually about. So let's first talk about how Saving 6 and Redeeming 6 correlate to the first two books in the Boys of Toman series, Binding and Keeping 13. So in these books, you are now following Aoife and Joey, who are two side characters that we did originally meet in Binding and Keeping 13. And in Saving 6 specifically, you're actually following events that took place before the events of Binding and Keeping 13, and you're following Aoife and Joey over the course of 6 years, from middle school up through high school, so from the ages 12 and 18, and then at the end of this book is when we finally catch up to the timeline of Binding 13. And then according to my friend who did already finish reading this book, I have not read this book, but we're going to talk about it slightly in today's video, you are finally caught up to Binding and Keeping 13's timeline, and for the majority of this book you are following the same timeline, and you get about 200 or so pages at the end that surpasses the timeline of Keeping 13. So yeah, that is how these two books fit into Binding and Keeping 13's timeline. So with that said, what is Saving 6 actually about? Well, it starts on the first day of middle school when Joey and Aoife initially meet, and they're both instantly drawn together because they're the two most beautiful people each other has ever seen. The thing is that this is the day that Joey's entire life changes, because this is the day that Darren actually leaves his entire family. So Joey's now going to be the one to have to save his entire family from their abusive father and be the one to step in because Darren is now no longer around to do it for him. And so because of that, we end up following Joey throughout the years as he starts to turn more and more towards drugs and girls and keeps pushing Aoife away because he doesn't want to suck her into his horrible life. The thing is that Aoife doesn't want to take no for an answer, so they end up becoming reluctant friends per Aoife's insistence and Joey's reluctantness. And then we basically follow this repetitive cycle for the first 360 pages of this book, where Aoife ends up getting a boyfriend that she doesn't really care about and doesn't treat her very well, and then breaks up with him over and over again, and then tries to get Joey to admit his feelings, and then he just doesn't treat her right. He's like, no, I don't care, go away. So she goes back to the boyfriend. He doesn't treat her right. She breaks up with him. We go back to Joey. They just are like reluctant friends of sorts, and then it's just a circle that we go in over and over and over again for 360 pages. And so throughout the years, we end up watching Aoife as she's constantly getting jealous over seeing Joey get with other girls right in front of her face, and Joey's constantly getting jealous of her boyfriend. And then after following this repetitive cycle for 360 pages, they finally break the cycle, have their first kiss, and then start growing closer, mostly because Joey finally gives into how he feels about her. And then the rest of the book is mainly just following as Joey keeps spiraling because of his home life, turning to drugs, lying to Alfie about it, and then them two getting it on a bunch because now they're obviously together. And then he finally hits rock bottom with the drugs and decides to break up with Aoife because of it. He's like, look, you are way too good for me. I'm just gonna bring you down. You shouldn't be with me, so therefore I'm breaking up with you. And she's like, I'm not gonna let this happen. I love you and I'm gonna stick around with you. I wanna be with you. You go figure out whatever it is you have to figure out, go fix yourself, and then I'm going to be here waiting for you whenever you're ready to come back to me. And that is where book 1 ends. And so with that said, we already know from Binding and Keeping 13 that Joey and Aoife are together, still dealing with the same sort of stuff with his drugs and home life and things along those lines, as well as the fact that she's eventually going to become pregnant. So the majority of Redeeming 6, like I had told you before, is going to follow the same timeline as Binding and Keeping 13. So we're probably going to get to see the same sort of stuff going down just now from their point of view. We'll probably get a couple of overlapping scenes and we'll start to see all of those characters and things along those lines. And like I had said before, my friend told me that you do get about 200 pages or so at the end of Redeeming 6 that does surpass the timeline of Keeping 13. So that is more or less what you can expect from Saving 6 and Redeeming 6. So now it is time for my review, and if you have been to any of my YouTube review videos before, then you do know that I am absolutely amazing at writing down all of the thoughts that I want to share with you, not as good at verbally repeating it. So I do apologize if you see me looking at my phone a little bit, because I just have everything so perfectly written down and I really don't want to mess it up. But with that said, I wanted to start my review off by saying that there was something about Binding and Keeping 13 that was super addictive and just kept making me want to flip the page because I wanted to know what was going to happen next. And unfortunately, Saving 6 did not give me that same feeling. I didn't feel the angst or crazy emotional connection that everybody else seems to be feeling when they're reading this book and then going online and sharing their feelings about it. And the thing is that I can handle a long storyline. I actually often prefer it. I absolutely love when we get a really amazing build-up with a lot of scenes and conversations and really making the characters feel real because we get to spend time with them as if it's like literally just like living their life instead of only getting to see the big moments. So usually stuff like that works for me, but unfortunately the way that this book specifically was going down just was way too repetitive for me and was driving me nuts. I hate when we're seeing the same situation over and over again and the characters just are not learning from their mistakes. It really just drove me up the wall and just kept getting more and more aggravating as the book went on. I also am not a fan of going backwards in a timeline and seeing the same storyline from someone else's point of view. I've already seen where these characters end up in their future, so I know exactly where they're going, and I don't per se need to have seen how they got there. It doesn't make for a very interesting story for me because there's nothing very surprising about it. And what actually sucks is that I was a really big fan of Joey and Aoife in Binding and Keeping 13. I really liked the roles that they played in that book, and I was a fan of them, and I felt for their storyline. But now that I got to see their storyline from their point of view and where they started and how they got to where they got, unfortunately, it really ruined my view on them, and now I really am no longer a fan of them, and that absolutely sucks for me. And then on top of that, an even bigger issue that I had is that I am not a fan of reading love stories between two people who are clearly getting with other people and then both getting jealous because of it. I'm a very jealous person myself, and it is just not the type of storyline that I like to read about. I feel like I could have let a situation like that slide if it was right at the beginning of the book and then they had one of those jealousy situations and that made them change. But that's not what happened. We had 360 pages worth, an entire novel's worth of them going through the same repetitive motion of not learning from their mistakes and then just getting jealous on top of jealous on top of jealous. And I just really don't like reading those moments where it was like we got to see Aoife just see Joey hook up with another girl and then we got that stomach churning feeling because of how jealous she was over it. And the thing is that I'm not a fan of cheating. I say this all of the time on my channel, and even though this wasn't per se cheating because they clearly were not in a relationship with each other, that time was used as a buildup for their inevitable relationship, and that's just not the type of buildup that I want to see in my romances. And because we spent so much time watching both of them getting with other people, it made it very hard for me to end up falling in love with either one of them, not only as individuals but also as love interests for each other. Watching Alfie constantly going back to her boyfriend who didn't treat her very well made it very hard for me to like her, respect her opinion and the choices that she made, and overall it just gave me a very bad vibe off of her. I feel like I much rather would have enjoyed seeing her just choose to be single and wait for Joey to realize his feelings for her rather than just settle for someone who wasn't treating her right, and every time Joey just confirmed that he doesn't want to be with her, she would just go back to the guy over and over again. It just really made no sense to me, and I feel like if the extra boyfriend was just left out and we just saw this girl who was madly in love with this guy and the guy was just pushing her away because he thought that he wasn't good enough for her, and then eventually he gave into their feelings and then they got together, I feel like that storyline would have made a lot more sense to me and I could have fallen in love with it a lot more. But instead I just absolutely absolutely hated Aoife because of the choices that she made and the repetitiveness that she ended up putting us through. I feel like throughout this entire book, they constantly were saying how she was one of the most beautiful people in her entire school, and she literally could have had absolutely anyone, and instead she chose to have eyes for the two people who were not only good for her, but also weren't even nice to her. And what sucks is that I usually am a fan of the whole like damaged hero with like the good girl who's gonna come and save him and show him the light and like make him happy and things along those lines. Like I can get down with a relationship like that, even if it was like a bit toxic in places. But the thing is that the way that this one was being built up and the entire situation around how everything was going down just really wasn't working for me. And then as for Joey, I definitely liked seeing him as a brother over seeing him as a boyfriend. I really liked him in Buying and Keeping 13 for being that like broken and damaged brother who would literally die for his siblings and protect them at any cost. But then seeing him as a boyfriend really made me look at him from a much shittier point of view, and I honestly wouldn't have gone anywhere near him romantically with a 10-foot pole. He was a walking red flag, and he knew it, Aoife knew it. He made it clear as day that that was why he was really pushing her away and didn't want to get close to her, but she was just way too stubborn and wouldn't let him basically save her from himself. And my issue with that is that I didn't think that the connection that was being built up throughout the book between the two of them really made it worth it for her to stick by his side. She was holding out hope this entire time that the 12-year-old boy that she had met on the first day of middle school was somehow still in there, and he was, but he also was a drug addict who had a tendency to be violent when his emotions are running hot, and she just chooses to not make that a deal breaker for her, even though that's basically his entire personality. We don't get to see anything from him besides for that in this book. In Binding 13, we did get to see a different side of him because he was the protective brother that was literally willing to die for his siblings. But here, that redeeming aspect of him was missing for me, and that is why it made it very hard for me to fall in love with him. And the only thing that I really saw to be drawing these two people together was that they were both so crazy attracted to each other. They were both the two most beautiful people each other has ever seen. They literally said that over and over and over again throughout this book about how good looking these two people were and how attracted they were to each other. And that is what initially drew them together. And then they built up a friendship over years because of that. And then naturally they got attached to one another because they've been in each other's lives for so long. But that is not an epic love story in my personal opinion. That is two people making bad choices over and over again and just staying in each other's orbit because they are just that drawn to each other and used to being in each other's lives. And it really bothered me that she would always just make excuses for him. Like he would literally beat people up or do drugs and then literally lie to her face. And she would see right through him and know that he was lying to her, but she just wouldn't do anything about it because she knew that she couldn't change him. So she just let it go and loved him anyway. And it was just a very toxic relationship for me. And I guess I'm over reading those type of stories. I do feel like I could have gotten down with like the toxic vibes that it was giving off if it was built up in an entirely different way. But just the way that everything was laying itself out to build up this epic love story of them basically like wanting to be in each other's lives no matter what, because that is just how close of a connection they have. It just didn't really work for me. I just needed an entirely different like origin story for them, and unfortunately that is not what I got, and that is why I will not be continuing with the Redeeming Six. I heard that, you know, if you liked book one, you're gonna absolutely love book two because it's a little bit more heartbreaking and it really like gives you that whole conclusion and you just get to watch them more and more. And if you were enjoying book one, you would enjoy book two, but I wasn't enjoying book one, and therefore I don't really want to put myself through book two, especially because now that we're going to be getting into the timeline of Binding and Keeping 13, and I still absolutely love this book, even though now these two characters are slightly tainted for me, I really don't want to mess with the mental memory that I have of it and then start seeing the same situations from like, you know, these two characters' point of view. So instead, I am going to preserve my memory of, you know, the timeline of Binding and Keeping 13, and I'm going to stop before we literally start getting up to those moments. And so to just further my review a little bit and kind of show you where I was pulling all of my thoughts and feelings from, I did want to quickly read to you a couple of quotes and pages that I had shared as I was reading the book to kind of show you and explain to you a little bit like where I was pulling my feelings from. So on page 177, we're currently at like a party and Joey's there and Aoife's there, and Aoife's boyfriend wasn't treating her very well, so she ends up breaking up with him. And this is a conversation that she was having with her now ex-boyfriend for the like 1,000th 1,000th time at this point because we're already 200 pages in and they broke up countless amounts of times. But either way, she was trying to break up with him, and the boyfriend is basically like, you want him. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you know exactly what I'm talking about, who I'm talking about. And she's like, this isn't about Joey. And he's like, it's always about him, Aoife. It will always come back to him because you are all about him. Don't bother denying it. It's written all over your face. And she's like, he's my friend. And he's like, bullshit. And then she's like, oh, I'm not fighting with you about this. I have a friendship with Joey and I'm not giving it up for anyone. And then he's like, you mean you're not giving him up? But Jesus Christ, how blind can you get? The asshole doesn't want you. When are you going to get it through your thick skull? He doesn't give two shits about you, and it's fucking pathetic to see you fall over him. And then basically the boyfriend turns her to where Joey's currently like making out with a girl on the wall. And then we jump into Aoife's head, and basically she's like, Paul catching a hold of my chin and forcing me to watch as Danielle Long pinned Joey against the wall of the pavilion and thrust her tongue into his mouth. And even though his hands hung limply at his sides, he rocked his hips and kissed her back. Oh yeah, he was definitely into it. Into her. My breath hitched in my throat, and it took everything I had inside of me to stand my ground and not break down. And then the boyfriend's like, look, reiterating, forcing me to take it all in. That's how much he's thinking about you, Aoife. He doesn't give a damn. And that moment alone, first of all, gave me that horrible stomach feeling of like my jaw dropping. I'm jealous and like this is not making me feel good. And we got so many moments of that throughout the book. But then on top of that, this just was like a moment where I really felt how pathetic Aoife was over Joey. Like she would just like look at it and not do anything about it. And then therefore, because she had that horrible feeling, she would literally get back with her ex-boyfriend the next day because he was just like easier to be with than I guess being alone. I don't even know. But either way, that was the first one I wanted to share with you. And then on page 483, we just finished up a moment where Joey ended up like taking a bunch of drugs, even though like Aoife doesn't really want him to take drugs, obviously. And now he's sleeping it off in her bed. And in her head, she's basically like, I never wanted to experience a day like today ever again. There were no words to describe the level of helplessness I had felt when I watched Joey soar and then roughly crash and burn. I wasn't stupid. I can see the red flags shooting up in every direction. Problem was, I was too in love to take heed because I knew that beneath all the pain and bullshit, there was someone worth saving in there. He was a good person who made terrible decisions. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was trying to survive in the only way he knew how, by self-medicating. Even as I watch him sleep it off in my bed, I can see the heartache he repressed to me written all over every inch of his face. He was going to break my heart. I knew it. I can see it coming from a mile away. And I still couldn't seem to get my self-preservation instincts to kick in and protect me from the inevitable. And I do agree with her. There was someone good in there to save. Like throughout this book, there are moments, which we'll get into in a minute, where, he keeps thinking that he's like his father with all the addiction and the violent tendencies and things along those lines. And I do think that, yeah, he has a couple red flags going on, but he is worth saving. The issue is that I don't see why she sees that he's worth saving, because this entire time, the whole time they were building up this relationship with this like reluctant friendship that they had going on, Joey didn't even treat her that great. He was always like lying to her and like pushing her away and not even being the best of a friend. So I don't really understand where she fell in love with him and why she fell in love with him. And I think that was a really big thing that bothered me throughout this book. And then on page 500/501, we're actually at a moment where Aoife is meeting Joey's mother for the first time, and Joey leaves the room for a minute. So Joey's mother takes it as an opportunity to talk to Aoife, and she's basically like, look, my son is a loose cannon, just like his father was at that age. And then Aoife's like, yeah, that's not even close to being true. Joey is nothing like your husband. And then like surprise shows on the mother's face. And then Aoife's like, yeah, I have eyes. I know what happens in this house. And then she's like, you don't know anything. And she's like, I know a lot more than you think. So don't dare tar Joey with the same brush as him. And then the mother's like, look, I understand the need to defend him. I understand the temptation. I was your age once. I understand all about the temptation that comes with loving a boy like my son. He's handsome and talented, headstrong and protective, wild and reckless. But just remember that protectiveness can switch to possessiveness in a blink of an eye. Headstrong can switch to commanding, and while recklessness can lead to more than just addiction. You do know that, don't you? And then she's like, no, what? And then the mom's like, that my son has an ongoing battle with addiction. And then Aoife's heart plummets, and she's like, he used to, he's okay now though. And then the mom's like, you don't really believe that. Someone like my son with that kind of habit that has been going on for as many years as it has can't make it go away overnight. And as powerful as first love may seem, it will never be strong enough to overcome his demons. He will never want you more than he wants his next fix, Aoife. And that's a sad truth of my son's life. And then Aoife's like, you're wrong. And she's like, I wish with all of my heart that I was, but I know I'm not. I'm only one flick of the switch away at any given time. And if I can give you one piece of advice, it would be to run for cover before my son explodes like his father and you're swallowed up in the riptide. And the thing with that scene is that that is actually how I was feeling this entire time. And that may be like the adult in me coming out, and I'm starting to see all of these like, toxic damage sort of relationship stuff, like from the other point of view where it's like, this isn't good and you shouldn't be putting yourself into this situation, as opposed to the other way that I'm sure a lot of people are seeing it in the way of like, well, she loves him so much that she's willing to like see the best of him and like always stick by his sides and things along those lines. But at the end of the day, this is the sad truth. He's always going to have an issue with addiction. He's always going to have a tendency to be violent. And even though he may not end up like his father and really go down that hill, he still has that in him. And you can't convince me on that otherwise, even though I am sure that in Redeeming 6, we're going to start to see all of those redeeming qualities in him that I've been waiting for the entire time of Saving 6. Like, that is what the book is actually called. And I'm sure that everything that I feel like was missing in Joey's personality in this book, because this book is the book of his addiction, and then the second book is going to be the book of his recovery. I'm sure that's when we're going to actually be able to easily fall in love with him. But at the end of the day, it's like I had 650 pages worth of Joey where I really didn't like him, where he didn't treat her right, where we didn't have a good build up to their relationship. And therefore, why would I want to put myself through 750 pages worth of them trying to redeem themselves? I'm sure that this book would be great, but I just don't think that it can really fix the building blocks that we got in this book. And with that said, that is more or less everything that I wanted to share with you for my review for this book. So I do hope that you enjoyed hearing my take on how I interpreted this entire story. I know that I'm in the very like unpopular opinion side of this because this book seems to be working for like almost everybody that I see online, but it's okay that people have differences of opinion. Just because something worked for you doesn't mean that it has to work for me, and just because something didn't work for me doesn't mean that it's not necessarily going to work for you. I just wanted to give you my point of view from when I read this story and why I felt how I felt. So I'm so curious to hear if you either plan on still reading this book after everything that I shared with you, if you've read it already and have the same or difference of opinion on me, or if you just want to continue the conversation down below, because I love to chat with you guys a little bit more. So with that said, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my review. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and also subscribe to my channel if you're not currently subscribed. And also make sure to check the link that I'll have below to my Patreon if you want to be a part of voting for what book I read and review for in next month's video. So with that said, again, thank you so much, and until next time, enjoy reading.